The alarm clock chimed 4:30 a.m. as Kang Minji walked through the quiet streets of Gangnam, Seoul, towards the convenience store where he had been working for 2 years. His footsteps echoed through the luxurious neighborhood which, at that hour, was still asleep. The lights of the skyscrapers flashed like artificial stars, constantly reminding her of the social chasm that separated her reality from that of the locals. At 25, Minji carried on her shoulders the responsibility of supporting her sick grandmother in Busan, where she sent a large part of her salary every month. Her blue and white uniform was impeccably ironed, even though it had been the same for years. Her dignity, she thought, was priceless. That same morning, a few blocks away, Choi Ki-hyun, CEO of the Choi Enterprises Group, was finishing his exercise session in his penthouse's private gym. At 32, he ran one of South Korea's largest conglomerates. Inherited from his father after a serious stroke left him debilitated, the weight of responsibility and the bitterness of seeing his father, once so strong, now dependent on constant care, had hardened his heart. "Mr. Choi, your father was discharged from the hospital this morning," his secretary Park Soo-ah informed him over the intercom. "He insists on taking a walk by himself, despite the doctor's recommendations." Ki-hyun sighed, frustrated. His father, always stubborn, refused to accept his limitations. "Send someone to follow him discreetly," he ordered, unaware that this decision would change the course of several lives. In the convenience store, Minji was organizing the shelves when he heard a crashing noise outside. Through the window, he saw an elderly man lying on the sidewalk. Without hesitation, she ran to help him, completely forgetting that she was alone in the store. Mr. Choi Jin-ho, Ki-hyun's father, was pale and disoriented. Minji, with surprising calm, not only helped him to sit down, but also used his own coat to protect him from the morning chill. He ran into the store and got water and some basic medicines, using the money from his own wallet. "So, I'm going to call an ambulance," she said, but the elderly man held her hand. "No, please. I've caused enough trouble," he replied, embarrassed. Minji stayed by his side for almost an hour, completely ignoring the loss in his salary for the time lost. When Mr. Jin-ho finally felt better, she insisted on paying for a cab to take him to safety, handing the driver practically all the money she had saved for her expenses for the week. What Minji didn't know was that one of Ki-hyun's designated security guards had witnessed the whole scene, discreetly photographing every moment of his selfless kindness. That same afternoon, Ki-hyun was examining the photos in his office on the 50th floor of Choi Tower. His usual skepticism struggled against the evidence of a genuine kindness that seemed to demand nothing in return. Intrigued, he began to investigate Minji's life. The reports that came into his hands over the next few weeks only deepened his fascination. He discovered that she worked 2 jobs, regularly sent money to her sick grandmother, and still found time to help out at an old people's shelter at weekends. Her generosity seemed to know no bounds, even though she lived on so little. Determined to better understand this phenomenon that challenged his cynical view of the world, Ki-hyun started going to the convenience store in the early hours of the morning, dressed in simple clothes, introducing himself as Ki, an ordinary worker from the neighborhood. Minji always welcomed him with the same sincere smile he offered to all his customers, without imagining that the simple man who bought coffee every morning was actually one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. As the visits became regular, Ki-hyun began to notice small details: how she sorted out loaves of bread that were close to expiry to give to homeless people, how she helped elderly people carry their shopping, how she always had a kind word for even the most difficult customers. One particularly cold morning, Ki-hyun witnessed Minji handing her own scarf to a shivering student at the bus stop in front of the store. It was at that moment that he realized that something inside him was changing. The wall of skepticism he had built up over the years was beginning to show cracks. His father, recuperating at home, often asked about that young angel from the convenience store, unaware that his son was becoming more and more entangled in a web of feelings that he didn't know how to manage. At night, in his luxurious apartment, Ki-hyun found himself wondering how it was possible to maintain such kindness in a world that he had always seen as ruthless and self-interested. The simplicity and purity of Minji's actions baffled him, and at the same time, attracted him in a way he had never experienced before. Meanwhile, Minji continued her routine, oblivious to the impact she was having on the powerful CEO's life. For her, every day was a new opportunity to do good, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. Her grandmother had always taught her that true wealth lay in being able to help others, and she took this teaching as her moral compass. Fate had intertwined their lives in an unexpected way, and now Ki-hyun found himself in a dilemma: how to remain close to someone so genuine while maintaining a lie about his identity. The answer to this question would change not only their lives, but also their understanding of the true value of kindness in an increasingly individualistic world. Minji watched the rain falling outside the convenience store, his thoughts wandering to the new regular customer who showed up every morning. There was something familiar in his eyes, a veiled sadness that she couldn't decipher. The man who had introduced himself only as Ki seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders, even when he smiled politely as he picked up his coffee. That particular morning, while organizing the shelves, Minji received a call from the hospital in Busan. His grandmother needed expensive and urgent surgery. The amount was astronomical by her standards, equivalent to 6 months' salary. Her hands shook as she hung up the phone, but she kept a smile on her face as the store door opened. It was Ki again, this time completely soaked by the rain. Without thinking twice, Minji grabbed a towel she kept for emergencies and offered it to him. "You're going to catch a cold like that," she said, genuinely worried. Ki-hyun, still maintaining his disguise, was touched by the gesture. How could she worry about a stranger when clearly something was bothering her? His years of business experience had trained him to read people, and Minji's red eyes didn't go unnoticed. "Is everything all right, Miss Khan?" he asked, using for the first time the surname he had read on the badge. Minji hesitated for a moment, but then smiled. "Just family worries. Nothing a good day's work won't help you forget." Meanwhile, in the Choi Group office, Secretary Park Soo-ah was receiving a detailed report on Minji's financial situation. Her grandmother's medical debts had piled up, and now with the need for surgery, the situation seemed impossible. Ki-hyun, returning to the office after changing from his simple clothes into an impeccable suit, found the report on his desk. His heart squeezed as he read the details. As CEO, he could resolve the situation with a single signature, but something was stopping him. Perhaps it was the fear that, by revealing his identity, he would lose the chance to meet the real Minji. In the evening, at his apartment in Gangnam, Ki-hyun received a visit from his father. Mr. Jin-ho was stronger, but still bore the marks of the stroke on his face. "Son, that young woman from the convenience store, did you find her?" asked his father, sitting down with difficulty. "Yes, Dad, and she's exactly as you described," replied Ki-hyun, pouring tea for them both. "You know, Ki-hyun, in all my years building our empire, I've rarely met anyone with such purity of heart," reflected Jin-ho. "People like that are rare in our world." His father's words echoed in his mind when, the next morning, he witnessed Minji consoling an elderly woman who had lost her wallet. To his surprise, she not only calmed the customer down, but also paid for her shopping with her own money. At the end of his shift, Minji walked to the nearest bank. Her savings were insufficient for her grandmother's surgery, but she was determined to find a solution. As she waited in line, she didn't notice that she was being watched by Soo-ah, who was reporting her every move to Ki-hyun. The secretary, moved by compassion, made a bold decision. "Mr. Choi, with all due respect, you're wasting your time. That girl is about to take out a loan at very high interest rates." Ki-hyun felt his heart squeeze. He knew he had to do something, but he also understood that any direct help could compromise the purity of the connection he was building with Minji. That evening, while closing up store, Minji found a mysterious envelope containing exactly the amount of money needed for his grandmother's surgery. Enclosed was just one note: "To repay your kindness to Mr. Jin-ho, a friend." Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the envelope. Her first reaction was to run to the police station. Money appearing out of nowhere seemed too suspicious. However, something in the note made her stop. The name Jin-ho. Where had she heard that name before? Ki-hyun, watching from his car parked across the street, saw her put the envelope in her bag after several minutes of thought. Her heart was racing. Was this the moment when her lie would start to fall apart? The full moon illuminated the streets of Seoul as Minji walked home, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The mystery of the envelope and the growing closeness to the client called Ki were mixing in her head, creating questions she still didn't know how to answer. What she didn't know was that her actions continued to deeply touch the heart of the powerful CEO. Ki-hyun, in his luxurious apartment, spent hours going over his interactions with her, wondering if there was a way to keep that connection pure even after the truth came out. The night progressed, and two hearts beat in tune, separated by kilometers of distance and a social chasm that seemed insurmountable. Fate had intertwined their lives in an unexpected way, and now every decision, every gesture of kindness, brought them closer to a truth that could either unite them or separate them forever. The mysterious envelope containing the money for Minji's grandmother's surgery triggered a series of events that no one could have predicted. After a restless night, she decided to deposit the money in a separate account, promising herself to investigate its origin before using it. That morning, while tidying up the shelves in the store, Minji found an old report in a forgotten newspaper. The headline highlighted the stroke of the chairman of the Choi Group, Jin Ho. His eyes widened as he recognized the name of the mysterious note. The photo showed the elderly man she had helped months ago, next to his son, CEO Choi Ki-hyun. The doorbell tinkled, announcing Ki's arrival. Minji watched him with new eyes, noticing for the first time his elegant posture, so different from the other customers in the neighborhood. His heart raced with sudden suspicion. "Good morning, Miss Khan," he said, with his usual restrained smile. "The usual coffee, please." As he prepared the coffee, Minji decided to take a chance. "Do you know the Choi Group? I read that they have an office nearby." Ki-hyun almost dropped his wallet. "Oh yes. Everyone in Gangnam knows them," he replied, trying to keep his composure. On the other side of town, in a hospital in Gangnam, Mr. Jin Ho was attending his physiotherapy session when he commented to his therapist about the young woman from the convenience store. "My son has been different these past few weeks," he said, smiling. "His eyes have a sparkle I haven't seen in years." The therapist, who coincidentally was Minji's cousin, listened with growing interest. During her lunch break, she called her cousin, sharing the patient's curious story. Minji felt his world spin as he realized the connections that were beginning to form. In his office, Ki-hyun was facing his own crisis. Soo-ah came in with more reports on Minji, including information about her volunteer work at an old people's shelter at weekends. So, she used the money from the envelope to set up an emergency fund for the elderly at the shelter, instead of using it for her grandmother's surgery. This revelation struck Ki-hyun like a thunderbolt. Even with her own urgent needs, Minji had chosen to help others first. His mask of cynicism was beginning to crumble completely. That afternoon, an unexpected storm hit Seoul. Minji, finishing his shift at the store, found Ki waiting outside with an umbrella. "Let me walk you to the subway," he offered. During the walk, their fingers touched lightly as they held the umbrella together. The moment was interrupted by a call on Ki-hyun's cell phone, his business phone, which he had forgotten to silence. The Choi Group's distinctive ringtone echoed in the empty street. Minji froze, his suspicions confirmed. But before he could say anything, a group of elderly people from the shelter where she worked appeared, seeking shelter from the rain. Without hesitation, she ran to help them, momentarily forgetting her discovery. Ki-hyun watched as she organized a small convoy of shared umbrellas, ensuring that each senior reached their destination safely. His heart filled with an emotion he hadn't felt for a long time, pure, sincere admiration. Back at his luxurious apartment, Ki-hyun found his father waiting. "You're in love," Jin Ho declared bluntly, "and you're afraid of losing something precious because of who you are." In Minji's small apartment, she looked through old magazine photos, confirming her suspicions about Ki's true identity. Instead of anger, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Why would a powerful CEO pretend to be an ordinary worker? The next morning, the routine in the store seemed normal, but the air was full of undisclosed secrets. Ki arrived at the usual time, But Menji noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her coffee. "You know," she said softly, "they say that the richest people in Seoul drink their coffee from imported porcelain cups. But I believe that the real flavor lies in the sincerity with which it is served." Ki-hyun felt the weight of that sentence. The moment of truth was approaching, and he knew he would have to choose between maintaining his comfortable lie or risking everything for something authentic. The city continued its frenetic pace outside, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding inside that small convenience store. Two souls, separated by a social chasm, but united by something stronger than status or money, were about to discover whether true goodness could overcome the barriers of appearances and lies. The meeting in the rain had changed everything. Menji stayed up all night, going over every interaction with Ki in his mind, noticing the little signs he had ignored. How could he not have noticed the resemblance between the mysterious client and the CEO of the Choi Group in the magazine photos? The next morning, the Choi Enterprises Group was buzzing with the news that Ki-hyun had cancelled all his meetings. Sua watched her boss through the glass walls of the office, noticing how he seemed lost in thought as he stared at the city below. "Mr. Choi," she interrupted softly, "your father is on the phone. He insists it's urgent." Mr. Jinho's voice sounded worried. "Son, I've just found out something interesting about Miss Khan. She refused to use the money from the mysterious envelope for her grandmother's surgery." Ki-hyun felt his heart squeeze. "What do you mean, Dad?" "She set up an emergency fund for the elderly at the shelter. She said she couldn't use money of unknown origin for her own benefit." In the convenience store, Menji was facing his own dilemma. An elegant lady entered, her high heels echoing across the floor. It was Park Sua, but Menji didn't know that yet. "Are you Kong Menji?" asked Sua, studying her intently. "Yes, what can I do for you? I represent a foundation that offers scholarships. Your name was put forward because of your volunteer work at the old people's shelter." Menji hesitated. "Thank you, but I can't accept. It would be unfair to receive help when there are so many others who need it more." Sua smiled internally. Now she understood why her boss was so intrigued by this young woman. That afternoon, Ki-hyun decided he couldn't keep up the charade any longer. He dressed in his simple clothes for the last time and headed for the store. But before he arrived, he witnessed a scene that made him stop. Menji was outside, consoling a teenage girl in school uniform who was crying. "No matter what anyone says, your value doesn't lie in the brands on your clothes or the neighborhood you live in," she said, offering the girl a handkerchief. The scene transported him to his own adolescence, when the weight of the Choi name began to define all his relationships. How many real friendships had he lost because of his status? "Miss Khan," he called out, gathering his courage. "Can we talk?" Menji looked at him with a mixture of emotions in his eyes. "Of course, Mr. Choi Ki-hyun." The silence that followed was deafening. In the small space between the store shelves, two completely different worlds finally met without masks. "Why have you been pretending all this time?" she asked softly. "Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as a person, not as a title or a bank account," he replied, his voice charged with emotion. "And the envelope with the money? It was the least I could do after your kindness to my father. But you turned my attempt to help into something even bigger, benefiting the whole shelter." Menji smiled sadly. "Money without purpose has no real value, Mr. Choi. Please call me Ki-hyun, or Ki if you prefer. That man who had coffee here every morning? He was more real than the CEO everyone knows." Just then, Mr. Jinho entered the store leaning on his cane. His eyes lit up when he saw Menji. "My guardian angel!" he exclaimed, making them both turn around in surprise. "Dad, what are you doing here?" asked Ki-hyun, worried. "I came to thank you personally," replied Jinho, approaching Menji. "Not just for helping me that day, but for teaching my son something precious." Menji felt his cheeks blush. "I didn't do anything special, sir." "On the contrary," Ki-hyun interrupted. "You showed me that there is still genuine goodness in the world, that some people do good simply because it's the right thing to do." The small space of the convenience store seemed to vibrate with the intensity of unspoken emotions. Outside, Seoul continued its frenetic pace, but within those walls, time seemed to have stopped. "And now," asked Minji, his voice only a whisper. Now, replied Ki-hyun. I'd like to meet the real Minji, not as a CEO or as a regular customer, but as someone who has learned from you the real value of kindness. Mr. Jin-ho watched the scene with a satisfied smile. His son, who had hidden behind numbers and contracts for so long, was finally learning the most valuable of lessons, that sometimes the greatest riches come in the simplest packages. Night fell over Seoul, and with it, a new story began to unfold. A story where masks fell and hearts open, proving that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find your way back to yourself. The alarm went off at 4 in the morning in Ki-hyun's luxurious apartment, but he was already awake. The revelation of his true identity to Minji the night before had made him uneasy. For the first time in years, the powerful CEO of the Choi Group felt vulnerable. On the other side of town, Minji hadn't been able to sleep either. Sitting at her small kitchen table, she reread the note that had accompanied the mysterious envelope. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but that didn't make the situation any less complex. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was from the hospital in Busan. His grandmother's condition had worsened. We need to perform surgery as soon as possible, the doctor informed him. Minji looked at her bank account on the mobile app. The emergency fund she had set up for the old people's shelter still untouched. At the Choi Group's headquarters, Suha found his boss gazing out at the city through the windows of his office. "So, the shareholders are concerned about your recent meeting cancellations," she informed him hesitantly. "Suha," Ki-hyun turned to face her. "When was the last time we did something really significant with our economic power?" The question took his secretary by surprise. In 15 years working for the Choi family, it was the first time she had seen him question the purpose of his wealth. That afternoon, Minji received an unexpected visit at the old people's home, where she worked as a volunteer. Mr. Jin-ho appeared, leaning on his cane, accompanied by a full medical team. "I've come to repay your kindness," he announced, smiling. "From today, this shelter will have full medical assistance, courtesy of the Choi Group." Minji's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Jin-ho, is that?" "No," he interrupted her gently. "It's not charity. It's recognition. You've shown me that there is still genuine goodness in this world, and now I want to multiply it." Across the room, Ki-hyun watched the scene, dressed formally this time. Seeing Minji in her element, surrounded by the elderly people she loved so much, made his heart race. She hadn't changed her posture when she saw him in his impeccable suit. His eyes still conveyed the same sincerity as always. "Mr. Choi," she approached after her father had walked away. "Why do this now?" "Because you taught me that power without purpose is empty," he replied, his voice low so that only she could hear. "And because I want you to meet the real Choi Ki-hyun, not just the CEO or the undercover client." One of the elderly women from the shelter, Miss Park, approached them with a mischievous smile. "Minji, so this is the man you sighed for every morning?" Minji blushed intensely, while Ki-hyun couldn't hold back a smile. Mrs. Park continued. "She always came home from work talking about a kind customer called Ki. She said that his eyes carried a sadness that she wanted to understand." The moment was interrupted by Minji's cell phone. It was the hospital again. She turned away to answer it, and Ki-hyun noticed how her shoulders tensed during the conversation. "Your grandmother's surgery," he said when she returned. "Why didn't you use the money I left in the envelope?" "Because money without a story has no real value," she replied firmly. "I'd rather find my own way." At that moment, Ki-hyun completely understood why he had fallen in love with her. It wasn't just her kindness, but her unwavering integrity. "Let me help," he asked. "Not as a CEO, not as an anonymous benefactor, but as someone who cares about you." Minji studied him for a long moment. "How can I trust you after so many lies?" "Allow me to show you who I really am," he replied. "No masks, no pretenses. Just me, learning to be a better person through your eyes." Mr. Jin-ho watched the two interact with satisfaction. Turning to Suha, who was accompanying him, he commented, "You know, sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters. My stroke taught me that, and now it's teaching my son." As the sun set over Seoul, casting golden shadows through the shelter's windows, Minji and Ki-hyun found themselves at a turning point. The truth had been revealed, but the road ahead was still uncertain. One condition, Minji finally said. If we're going to start again, it has to be as equals. I don't want your pity or your power. I want to meet the man behind the name Choi. Ki-hyun felt a weight leave his shoulders. I promise to show you every part of who I am, including the parts I'm afraid to face. On the other side of the room, the elderly people from the shelter watched the scene with knowing smiles. They had witnessed the transformative power of true love enough times to recognize it when they saw it. Night fell over Seoul, and with it, a new page began to be written. A story where power and humility, wealth and simplicity, past and future intertwined in a delicate dance, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. The hospital in Busan was silent when Minji arrived after a 3-hour train journey. Her grandmother, lying on the hospital bed, smiled when she saw her, but her tired eyes revealed the pain she was trying to hide. You didn't have to come all this way, dear, said Mrs. Kim, her voice weak. Of course I did, Grandma, Minji replied, holding her wrinkled hand. The heart monitor next to her bed showed a steady rhythm, reminding her of the urgency of the situation. In Seoul, Ki-hyun was signing documents in his office when Sua rushed in. So, we found out that Miss Kong has traveled to Busan. She's resigned from the convenience store. The pen in his hand stopped in the middle of a signature. What do you mean she resigned? Apparently, she intends to stay in Busan to look after her grandmother, explained Sua. She left a letter for you at the store. On the train back to Seoul, Minji looked out of the window, recalling the difficult conversation with his grandmother. I don't want you to sacrifice your life for me, Mrs. Kim had said. That young CEO, I've seen how your eyes sparkle when you talk about him. Minji's cell phone vibrated with a message from Ki-hyun. Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? She typed and deleted several replies before finally writing. Because some decisions we have to make alone. At the old people's home, the news of Minji's departure caused a stir. Mrs. Park, who had become a close confidant, shared with Ki-hyun. You know, young man, sometimes true love isn't about staying but letting go. Ki-hyun spent the night in his office, studying medical reports and treatment possibilities. His father found him there the next morning, still poring over the documents. Son, said Jinho softly, you can't solve everything with money. But I can try, Dad, Ki-hyun replied, frustrated. I have all this power, and I can't help the person who really matters. In Busan, Minji was organizing the hospital documents when an international medical team entered her grandmother's room. Mrs. Kim, announced the head doctor, we have been informed that you have been selected for an experimental treatment program. Minji felt his heart squeeze, immediately recognizing Ki-hyun's hand behind it. But before he could protest, his grandmother said, You know, dear, sometimes we need to allow others to help us, not out of pity but out of love. The next day, Ki-hyun arrived in Busan, not in his private jet or luxury car, but on an ordinary train. He found Minji in the hospital cafeteria, his dark circles under his eyes revealing a bad night's sleep. You didn't have to do that, she said, without looking directly at him. I didn't have to, he replied, taking a seat opposite her. I did it because I now understand what you've always tried to teach me. Power without purpose is empty, but power used to help those we love, that's meaningful. Mrs. Kim watched the two of them interact through her bedroom window. They look like you and your father, she commented to Jinho, who had arrived for a surprise visit. Yes, he replied, smiling, but I hope they're wiser than we were. In the hospital garden, Minji and Ki-hyun walked in silence. The salty sea air of Busan carried memories of a simpler life, when she played nearby as a child. I can't accept your help if it means feeling indebted, she said at last. What if it's not help? Proposed Ki-hyun. What if it's a partnership? You taught me the value of genuine kindness. Let me show you how we can multiply it. He then revealed his plans to transform the Choi Group's healthcare program, starting with the hospital in Busan. It's not just for your grandmother, Minji. It's for all the families going through what you're going through. The tears that Minji had tried so hard to hold back finally fell. Why do you care so much? Because you showed me that there is a greater purpose than simply accumulating wealth, he replied, gently wiping away his tears. You gave me something that no amount of money can buy, the chance to be a better person. That night, as the moon reflected off the waters of Busan, two souls discovered that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find the true meaning of love and purpose. Mrs. Kim, watching from the hospital window, smiled as she saw her granddaughter finally allowing herself to be not only the one who helps, but also the one who accepts help. The sea wind carried promises of change as Seoul awaited the return of two hearts, transformed by the power of true love and mutual understanding. The empty space in the convenience store, where Menji used to work, seemed to cry out in silence. His replacement, a young university student, couldn't reproduce the same warmth in his smile when serving customers. The elderly in the neighborhood especially missed him. In Busan, the hospital routine took on new contours. Mrs. Kim was responding well to the experimental treatment, but the glances exchanged between Menji and Ki-hyun during medical visits carried a different weight now. The truth about the treatment program remained like an elephant in the room. "Minjia," her grandmother called out one particularly sunny afternoon, "you're wasting your time here. I saw the way that boy looks at you." "Grandma, it's complicated," Minji replied, adjusting the pillows. "He's CEO of the Choi Group, I know," interrupted Mrs. Kim with a shrewd smile. "But before that, he's just a man trying to do the right thing." In Seoul, Ki-hyun was facing his own battle. The board of directors questioned his recent decisions, especially the expansion of the medical assistance program. Sua watched her boss passionately defend each project, a remarkable change from the cold executive he used to be. "The Choi Group has always been synonymous with profit," argued one of the directors. "This sudden social concern could scare off investors. What if profit isn't our only legacy?" Ki-hyun retorted, his voice firm. "What if we can be remembered for something greater?" In the next room, Mr. Jin-ho smiled proudly as he listened to his son. His words were so reminiscent of those of his late wife, who for years had tried to humanize the way they conducted business. A week later, Menji received an unexpected call. The elderly shelter in Seoul was organizing a charity event and wanted his help. Mrs. Park over the phone didn't hide her true intentions. "Honey, sometimes we need to give fate a little help." Ki-hyun, hearing about the event through Sua, decided to participate discreetly. On the appointed day, the shelter was transformed. Colorful lanterns hung from the trees in the garden, and tables with traditional Korean food were scattered around the space. When Minji arrived, his heart stopped for a moment. Ki-hyun was there, not in his usual business suit, but in casual clothes, helping the elderly serve themselves. For a moment, he saw again the Ki he had met at the convenience store. "He's been coming here every weekend since you left," Mrs. Park whispered in his ear. "He says he's learning about genuine compassion." The evening progressed with musical performances by the elderly. One gentleman played the Gyeojeum, its melancholy notes echoing through the garden. Minji and Ki-hyun found themselves near one of the lanterns. "Your grandmother is better," he commented, breaking the silence. "Yes, thanks to the mysterious treatment that appeared out of nowhere," she replied, a slight teasing tone in her voice. "Minji," Ki-hyun turned to face her, "when are you going to understand that I didn't do this to buy your gratitude? I did it because, she insisted, her heart racing, "because you taught me that power without purpose is empty, and my purpose now is to try to be half the person you are." One of the elderly women in the shelter began to sing an old love song, her trembling voice carrying decades of emotion. Other elderly couples joined in to dance slowly. "You know," Ki-hyun continued, "my father told me something interesting the other day. He said that Mom used to say that true wealth isn't measured by money, but by how many lives you touch positively." Minji felt tears forming in his eyes. "Your mother sounded like a wise woman." "She was. And I'm sure she would have loved you." The moment was interrupted by a group of children from the nearby orphanage, arriving for their scheduled performance. Minji immediately turned to help them, her natural instinct to care for others manifesting itself. Ki-hyun watched her, amazed at her ability to spread love and attention to everyone around her. It was then that he had an idea. "What if," he proposed when he finally got a moment alone with her again, "we turned the medical assistance program into something bigger, a foundation dedicated to connecting people who need help with those who can offer it?" Minji's eyes lit up at the possibility. Like a network of kindness? Exactly. And I'd like you to run it. Ki-hyun, I have no experience in running. But you have something much more valuable. A heart that truly understands the meaning of helping others. The music in the garden changed to a livelier tune, and the laughter of old people and children mingled in the night air. It was a small taste of what they could accomplish together. I'm not asking for an answer now, said Ki-hyun softly. Just promise you'll think about it. Minji looked around at the happy faces that surrounded them, at the community that formed naturally through love and compassion. Perhaps she thought there was a way to multiply this kindness on a larger scale. The night wore on, and under the colored lanterns, two souls began to understand that sometimes fate has mysterious ways of uniting purpose, and love in a single journey. The announcement of the creation of the Choi Foundation for Social Welfare reverberated throughout Seoul like a silent earthquake. The major newspapers speculated on the sudden change in direction of the country's largest business group. While market analysts debated the impact on business, Minji watched from a distance, still in Busan, torn between caring for her grandmother and the possibilities opening up before her. Mrs. Kim continued to improve gradually, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. You've received another bouquet, commented No-san, bringing the flowers into the room. It was the third that week, each one accompanied by a card with a single sentence about kindness and purpose. In Seoul, Ki-hyun was facing a tense meeting with the board of directors. The shareholders are nervous, warned one of the senior members. First the medical program, now an entire foundation? That's not a charity. No, replied Ki-hyun, his voice firm. It's something bigger. It's our chance to redefine what it means to be a truly successful company. Mr. Jin-ho, present at the meeting, watched his son with growing pride. It was like seeing his late wife again, defending the importance of using corporate power for the greater good. At the old people's home, Mrs. Park was organizing a small celebration. Minji called. She announced to the residents, she's considering the foundation's proposal. The news was greeted with complicit smiles. The seniors had witnessed the birth of that peculiar love story, and now they were cheering for its development. In her office, Sua presented Ki-hyun with the initial results of the public opinion poll on the foundation. Surprisingly positive, she commented, especially among young people. They see it as a sign of change in the corporate world. It's not just a corporate change, Ki-hyun replied, looking at the photo of his mother on the table. It's a change in consciousness. In Busan, Minji was walking along the beach at dusk, mentally reviewing the events of the last few months. How had a simple convenience store clerk become involved in something so much bigger than herself? His phone vibrated with a message from Ki-hyun. I'm not trying to buy you or your decisions. I'm trying to create something that reflects what you taught me about true kindness. The message made her stop. The waves broke gently on the sand, reminding her of the constant rhythm of life, of the inevitable changes that we sometimes need to embrace. At the hospital, Mrs. Kim had a surprise visitor. Mr. Jin-ho had traveled to Busan especially to see her. Our children are stubborn, he commented, sitting down beside her bed. But their hearts are in the right place, she replied, smiling. Your daughter-in-law would have approved of Minji. She would have loved it, agreed Jin-ho, his eyes watering slightly. In Seoul, the foundation project was beginning to take shape. Ki-hyun had assigned a team to map out the city's main social needs, starting with the most deprived neighborhoods. That's how she would do it, he explained to Sua, who had asked him about the bottom-up approach. Minji always starts with those who need it most. Autumn was painting the streets of Busan in golden hues when Minji finally made his decision. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a sudden epiphany, but a realization as calm and clear as the morning. She called Ki-hyun late at night, when she knew he would still be in his office. I have some conditions, she said, without preamble. I'm listening, he replied, his heart racing. The foundation needs to be independent of the business group. No corporate interference in welfare decisions. And I want to start with the small projects, the ones that are usually ignored by the big donors. Ki-hyun smiled, recognizing in every word the essence of the woman he had fallen in love with. I had already imagined that you would say that. The documents are being prepared in exactly those terms. At the old people's home, Mrs. Park was leading a morning exercise session when she received the news. Her smile lit up the whole garden. "Look at that," she said to her companions. "Sometimes love needs a little push from fate." The transformation was just beginning. In Busan, Minji began to plan her return to Seoul, now no longer as a simple clerk, but as someone with a greater purpose. "Grandma," she said, holding Mrs. Kim's hand, "I promise I'll keep coming to visit you regularly." "I know, dear," replied her grandmother with a shrewd smile. "Besides, I'm sure that young CEO won't mind lending you his private jet from time to time." The comment made Minji blush, but he couldn't help smiling. Things were changing, yes, but the essence of what she believed remained the same. True wealth lies in the ability to make a difference in the lives of others. In her office in Seoul, Hee-hyun looked out over the city through the panoramic windows. Soon, that view would no longer be just of skyscrapers and corporate power, but of possibilities for social transformation. Fate had used a simple convenience store to unite two seemingly opposite souls, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles begin in the most unlikely places. The news of Minji's appointment as director of the Choi Foundation caused a stir in Seoul's business circles. A former convenience store clerk taking on such an important position generated speculation and questions about Choi Ki-hyun's sanity. "Sir, the press hasn't stopped calling," informed Sua, hurrying into the office. "They want to know about the relationship between you and Miss Khan." Ki-hyun, absorbed in foundation documents, just smiled. Gossip no longer bothered him like it used to. His inner transformation was deeper than any outside opinion. In Busan, Minji was preparing his bags for his return to Seoul. Mrs. Kim, already at home and recovering well, watched her granddaughter with tearful eyes. "I remember when you were 5 years old and insisted on giving your snacks to the children at the orphanage," she recalled. "Your heart was always bigger than your possibilities." At Gimpo Airport, Ki-hyun waited anxiously. There was no limousine or attendants, just him wearing jeans and a t-shirt, like the days when he pretended to be just Ki at the convenience store. When Minji walked through the arrival's gates, their gazes met. Something had changed between them. A deeper understanding, a silent realization that they were embarking on something bigger than themselves. "Welcome back," he said simply. The Choi Foundation's headquarters occupied a historic building in Insadong, far from the corporate skyscrapers. The choice of location had been Minji's suggestion. She wanted the space to be welcoming and accessible to everyone. "Your office is ready," announced Sua, who had volunteered to help with the transition. "Although I imagine you won't be spending much time in it." Minji smiled, knowing herself. She was already planning visits to communities in need, meetings with local leaders, assistance programs that went far beyond simple donations. Mr. Jin Ho, recovered and stronger, became a constant presence at the foundation. He found a new purpose in sharing stories with the elderly who attended the social programs. "You know," he commented to Minji over lunch, "my late wife always said that wealth without purpose was like a garden without flowers, beautiful but lifeless." The weeks turned into months and the Choi Foundation began to show results. Little stories of transformation arrived daily. Families reunited, dreams realized, lives changed through acts of kindness. Ki-hyun watched it all with a mixture of admiration and growing love. Minji had transformed not just the foundation, but the whole meaning of success for him. One afternoon, as they were walking through Uido Park after a long day at work, Minji suddenly stopped. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming," she confessed. "Everything has changed so quickly." Ki-hyun took her hand gently. "It hasn't changed that much. You're still the same person who spent your salary to help an elderly stranger on the street. And you're still the skeptical CEO who pretended to be a regular customer," she teased, smiling. At the old people's home, now completely renovated thanks to the foundation, Mrs. Park was organizing a special celebration. The residents had prepared a surprise performance for Minji, a traditional song that talked about fate and true love. "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you?" asked Minji, thrilled after the performance. "Darling, sometimes the universe needs a little help," replied Mrs. Park with a wink. Night was falling over Seoul, and in the foundation's office, Minji was finishing another day's work. On her desk, an old photo of the convenience store made her smile. Who would have thought that this small space would be the setting for such an extraordinary story? Ki-hyun entered silently, bringing them both coffee, a habit he had kept up since Ki's days. Do you still prefer convenience store coffee? She asked, accepting the drink. I prefer anything that reminds me of how we met, he replied. That's where I learned to see beyond appearances. The phone rang. It was Mrs. Kim from Busan, calling for her daily checkup. How's my favorite CEO? She joked. Busy, Grandma. But happy? Very happy. The city lights shone through the windows, creating an almost magical setting. Minji and Ki-hyun shared a moment of comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about how fate works in mysterious ways. The Choi Foundation was only just beginning its journey, but it had already proved that kindness and business didn't have to be worlds apart. It was possible to build bridges between different realities, as long as you had the courage to take the first step. And it all started with a gesture of kindness in a small convenience store. An article on the front page of the Seoul Economic Daily caused a stir on social media. Romance between CEO and former bank clerk raises suspicions about Choi Foundation's real motivation. Minji felt his stomach turn as he read the vicious insinuations about his relationship with Ki-hyun. Don't pay any attention to that, advised Sua, picking up the newspaper from Minji's desk. Petty people will always try to diminish what they don't understand. At the Choi Group's main office, Ki-hyun was facing a tense meeting with international investors. The presence of representatives from Hong Kong and Singapore made the atmosphere even more charged. Mr. Choi, began one of the investors in a Cantonese accent, we understand your philanthropy, but converting 30% of annual profits to social projects is too risky. Ki-hyun maintained his firm stance. Gentlemen, the real risk lies in continuing to ignore our social responsibility. The foundation is not just a charity, it's an investment in the future. In Busan, Mrs. Kim had an unexpected visitor. Mr. Jin-ho had traveled personally to discuss something important. Our family has always been traditional, he began, pouring tea. But Ki-hyun has changed so much since he met his granddaughter. At the foundation's headquarters, Minji was coordinating a new vocational training project for young people from underprivileged communities. During a presentation, a teenage girl raised her hand. Were you really a clerk? How did you get here? The innocent question touched a nerve. Minji took a deep breath before answering. Yes, I was. And I learned that it doesn't matter where you come from, but what you choose to do with the opportunities that arise. The afternoon brought an even more challenging surprise. A group of minority shareholders in the Choi Group filed a lawsuit questioning the legality of donations to the foundation. The document explicitly cited the relationship between Ki-hyun and Minji as a possible conflict of interest. They want an extraordinary meeting, Sua said, handing the documents to Ki-hyun. They're trying to force a vote to limit our decision-making power over social investments. At the old people's home, Mrs. Park was organizing a charity event when she noticed Minji arriving earlier than usual. Trouble in paradise? She asked gently, noticing the young woman's red eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not causing more problems than solutions, Minji confessed, helping to organize the tables for the event. Darling, real change is never easy, replied Mrs. Park, hugging her. Remember when you worked at the store? How many people doubted your genuine kindness? In his apartment in Gangnam, Ki-hyun was visited by his father. Mr. Jin-ho seemed especially pensive that evening. Son, do you remember what your mother always said about wealth? He asked, watching the city through the panoramic window. That true wealth isn't measured by numbers in a bank account, Ki-hyun replied, a nostalgic smile on his lips. Exactly. And do you know why I'm so happy with your recent choices? Because I finally see the same light in you that I saw in her eyes. The next morning, Minji arrived early at the foundation to find dozens of letters on his desk. They were testimonies from people who had been helped by the social programs, stories of overcoming, gratitude, and hope. One in particular caught his eye. It was from an elderly man who frequented the shelter. Before the foundation, I thought I was alone in the world. Now I understand that family is not just a matter of blood, but of the heart. Ki-hyun showed up mid-morning, carrying the same brand of coffee they served at the convenience store. I thought we needed to remember where it all started, he said, placing the cup on Minji's desk. People think you're throwing money away because of me, she muttered, unable to face him. No, he replied firmly. I'm investing in a better future because you taught me the true value of things. In the afternoon, during a meeting with community leaders, an elderly woman stood up to speak. "You newspaper people may doubt Miss Khan, but we know her. We saw her working hard to help others long before any foundation existed." The unexpected support made Minji realize that her story wasn't just about her and Ki-hyun. It was about all the people who believed that kindness and success didn't have to be mutually exclusive. At the end of the day, as they walked through Uedo Park, Ki-hyun held Minji's hand. "Do you know what I admire most about you? Your ability to remain authentic, no matter the challenges." A group of children ran past them, laughing and playing. "That's why we do this, isn't it?" asked Minji, watching them. "So that they have a future where goodness and success can coexist." The sun was setting over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. At the foundation's headquarters, the lights were still on. There was a lot of work to be done, many lives to be touched, many stories to be transformed. And in the heart of the city, two people were discovering that sometimes the greatest challenges bring with them the most beautiful opportunities for growth. An old photo of the convenience store went viral on social media. Minji, in his blue and white uniform, helping an elderly man who everyone now recognized as Jin Ho. The image, captured by an anonymous customer months ago, sparked an unexpected wave of public support for the Choi Foundation. "People are sharing their own stories about everyday kindness," reported Sua, showing the messages on her tablet. "It's becoming a movement on social media." Ki-hyun watched the repercussions with a mixture of relief and concern. The pressure from shareholders remained intense, but now there was a different narrative emerging, one that spoke of transformation and purpose. In Busan, Mrs. Kim had a special visitor. Young Mi, the nurse who had cared for her during her hospitalization, brought news of the impact of the foundation's healthcare program. "We've already helped more than 200 families," Young Mi explained with emotion. "People who would never have had access to specialized treatment now have hope." At the foundation's headquarters, Minji was coordinating a meeting with local businesspeople when a young executive raised her hand. "How do we convince our superiors to invest in social responsibility?" The question made Minji smile, remembering her first conversations with Ki-hyun. "By showing that kindness and success are not mutually exclusive, they're actually complementary." Mr. Jin Ho, who was quietly attending the meeting, couldn't hold back a tear. He saw in Minji the same glow that his late wife had when she talked about making a difference in the world. In the afternoon, while walking through Gwangjang Market, Ki-hyun and Minji were surprised by an old lady selling kimchi. "It's you? From the newspaper," she exclaimed, running from her stall. "My granddaughter got a scholarship through the foundation." The moment was captured by cell phone cameras and soon spread online, once again showing a human side to the story that the economic newspapers ignored. "Sometimes I wonder if we're really making a difference," Minji confessed later, as they shared a simple dinner in a small traditional restaurant. "Look around you," Ki-hyun replied, pointing to the people in the establishment. "Every life touched is an entire universe transformed." That same evening, Mrs. Park was organizing a special performance at the old people's home. The residents had prepared a performance of traditional music, but the real purpose was different. "We want to tell our stories," she announced, surprising Minji and Ki-hyun, "to show how small acts of kindness can change lives." One after the other, the elderly shared moments when the kindness of strangers had made a difference. Their narratives, recorded by foundation staff, became a powerful testimony to the impact of the work they were doing. In his office at the Choi Group, Ki-hyun was facing a crucial decision. The shareholders had proposed a deal. They would maintain their support for the foundation if he agreed to limit donations to a lower percentage of profits. "What would your mother do?" asked Jin Ho, who had visited him to discuss the situation. "She'd say that some principles are priceless," replied Ki-hyun, remembering the lessons of his childhood. Minji, meanwhile, was diving into a new project. Inspired by the stories from the shelter, she proposed creating a mentoring program where elderly people would share their experiences with young people from underprivileged communities. "It's like creating bridges between generations," she explained during a presentation to potential partners, turning wisdom into opportunities. The project quickly gained support from other companies, proving that the Choi Foundation's vision was catalyzing a larger change in Seoul's corporate mentality. One afternoon, while organizing documents in his office, Minji found an old note. the same one that had accompanied the mysterious envelope with the money for his grandmother's surgery. "Do you still keep that?" asked Ki-hyun, recognizing the paper in his hands. "To remind me of where we started," she replied, "and how much we've grown since then." At the old people's home, Mrs. Park received exciting news. Her life story would be the first episode of a documentary series on social transformation. "See," she said to Minji, "sometimes you just need someone to believe in you for the magic to happen." The words resonated deeply with both Minji and Ki-hyun. Their journey had started with the simple act of kindness in a convenience store, but it was turning into something much bigger, a movement that inspired others to rethink the meaning of success and purpose. In the evening, watching the city from the foundation's terrace, Ki-hyun held Minji's hand. "Do you know what I admire most about you? Your ability to see possibilities where others see only problems." A group of young foundation scholars were passing through the garden, laughing and chatting animatedly. Their dreams and aspirations were living proof that social transformation wasn't just an abstract idea. It was a reality in the making. "We still have a lot of work to do," said Minji, watching the young people. "Yes," agreed Ki-hyun, "but now we know we're not alone on this journey." The moon was rising over Seoul, illuminating a city that was slowly learning that true greatness is not measured only by skyscrapers and bank accounts, but by the ability to touch and transform lives. The headline in the Korea Herald caught everyone's attention at the Choi Foundation headquarters. "Shareholders call extraordinary meeting to decide future of social investments." A tense atmosphere hung in the air as Minji read the report on his tablet. "They want to vote on the dissolution of the foundation," Sua said, hurrying into the room. "They claim that social investments are damaging the group's profitability." In his office at the Choi Group, Ki-hyun was facing a tense video conference with investors from Singapore. The figures projected on the screen showed a small drop in quarterly profits, but a significant increase in the social impact of the projects. "Mr. Choi," interjected one of the investors, "we understand your philanthropic interest, but our shareholders expect consistent returns." Ki-hyun's response surprised everyone. And what return could be more valuable than transforming lives? At the old people's home, Mrs. Park was organizing a special event. The residents had prepared a presentation on how the foundation had changed their lives. Among them was Mr. Lee, a former executive who had lost everything in a financial scandal. "Before the foundation, I thought success was measured only by numbers," he shared, moved. "Now I understand that true wealth lies in the lives we touch." In Busan, Mrs. Kim was receiving an important call. The hospital where she had her surgery was expanding its free treatment program, inspired by the Choi Foundation's initiative. "Your granddaughter has started a silent revolution," commented the doctor in charge. "We're seeing other companies following suit." Back in Seoul, Minji was coordinating a meeting with young social entrepreneurs when his phone vibrated with a message from Ki-hyun. "We need to talk. It's important." The meeting took place in the old cafe next to the convenience store where it all began. The place was practically empty, except for an elderly couple in the corner. "The shareholders are willing to make a deal," Ki-hyun began, his voice tense. "They would keep the foundation, but with the reduced budget and without your participation on the board." Minji felt his heart squeeze. "They still think I'm an opportunist." "I won't accept it," Ki-hyun declared firmly. "But I need you to understand the risks. I could lose control of the group." On the other side of town, Mr. Jin-ho had his own important meeting. Former business partners, people who knew his late wife, listened attentively as he shared his vision for the future of the Choi Group. "My wife always said that companies have a responsibility to society," he explained. "Through Minji, my son finally understood that." News of the possible dissolution of the foundation leaked to the press, generating an unexpected wave of public support. On social media, beneficiaries of the social programs began sharing their stories using the hashtag #SalvamaFundaKeaChoi. "Look at this," Sua called out, showing her cell phone to Minji and Ki-hyun. A viral video showed dozens of elderly people from the shelter singing a traditional song, each holding posters with their stories of transformation. Miss Park, of course, was behind the initiative. "Did you think you could shut us up with numbers?" she said proudly. "Let's show that every life transformed is worth more than any spreadsheet." On the eve of the extraordinary meeting, Ki-hyun found an old photo on her desk, her mother, young and smiling, inaugurating the Choi Group's first corporate crash. On the back was a handwritten message: "Success without purpose is empty victory." "She'd be proud of you," said Jin-ho, quietly entering the office. "Of both of you, actually." Minji spent the sleepless night going over his journey from the convenience store to the office. Every face helped, every story transformed, every smile restored. Everything seemed connected in an invisible web of kindness and purpose. On the morning of the assembly, a surprise awaited at the entrance to the Choi Group's corporate building. Hundreds of people lined up silently, each holding a lit candle, beneficiaries of the foundation's programs, volunteers, community partners. "This is how we change the world," Ki-hyun whispered to Minji. As they made their way through the crowd, one heart at a time, the meeting room was packed. Shareholders, executives, and board members filled every available seat. The atmosphere was tense, expectant. Before the vote could begin, however, Mr. Jin-ho asked to speak. With firm steps, he approached the pulpit. In his hands was a document that no one had expected: his late wife's will. "My wife left her shares in the group on one specific condition," he announced, his voice clear and strong: "that they be used to promote positive social change. Today, at last, we are honoring her wish." The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Ki-hyun and Minji, who stood hand in hand, facing the decisive moment with the same strength that had united them from the start. The vote that followed would change not only the fate of the Choi Foundation, but the very way the Korean corporate world viewed its social responsibility. And it all started with the simple act of kindness in a convenience store. The vote at the extraordinary meeting ended with the surprising result: 52% of shareholders supported maintaining the Choi Foundation in its current structure. The late Mrs. Choi's will had changed not only the votes, but also the perspective of many on the true meaning of corporate legacy. "My mother always knew," Ki-hyun said to Minji as they left the corporate building. "She planted the seeds of this transformation years ago, waiting for the right moment for them to blossom." The next morning, the foundation's headquarters was buzzing with renewed energy. Suha was coordinating a series of meetings with new international partners who, inspired by the foundation story, wanted to replicate the model in their countries. "We have proposals from Japan, Singapore, and even Germany," she said enthusiastically. "Your story is changing the way companies see social responsibility." In Busan, Mrs. Kim had a special visitor. Youngmi, the nurse who had accompanied her during her treatment, brought exciting news about the medical assistance program. "We've managed to expand care to 3 new hospitals," she explained. "And do you know what's most interesting? Many doctors are volunteering to take part." At the senior shelter, Mrs. Park was organizing a different kind of celebration. The residents had decided to create a mentoring program for young social entrepreneurs, sharing their life and professional experiences. "Look at that," she commented to Minji, who was visiting the site. "Who knew that our stories of failure and starting over would be so valuable to the next generation?" In his office at the Choi Group, Ki-hyun found an old letter from his mother, carefully kept by Jin-ho all these years. The words seemed more relevant than ever. "Dear son, when you meet someone who makes you question everything you believe you know about success and happiness, don't hesitate. That person will be your greatest gift." A special ceremony was organized to celebrate the foundation's new phase. The location chosen couldn't have been more significant: the site of the former convenience store, which would be transformed into a community center. "This place," Minji said to the gathered audience, "has taught me that kindness knows no social status. Here, I've learned that each person carries a universe of possibilities within them." Among the guests, familiar faces stood out: Mrs. Park and the elderly from the shelter, Youngmi and her medical team from Busan, the young people benefiting from the educational programs, all united by an invisible web of transformation and hope. Mr. Jin-ho, watching the scene, shared a special moment with his daughter-in-law. "You know, Minji, my wife always said that true wealth is that which multiplies when it is shared." The cherry trees in the garden were beginning to blossom, their petals dancing in the wind like tears of joy. Ki-hyun and Minji walked among them, recalling their journey since that first morning in the convenience store. "Sometimes I wonder," Minji reflected, "if it's all just a dream." "If it is," replied Ki-hyun, holding her hand, "it's a dream we're building together, one act of kindness at a time. Night was falling over Seoul when unexpected news arrived. The story of the Choi Foundation was to be made into an international documentary. The producer wanted to capture not just the results, but the process of transformation that had changed so many lives. "We'll start with the convenience store," explained the project director. "We want to show how small gestures can trigger big changes." In her small apartment, Minji found an old blue and white uniform carefully folded. Her hands caressed the worn fabric, each fold telling a story of perseverance and hope. The phone rang. It was her grandmother from Busan. "Darling, I've just seen your television interview. You talked about how kindness is a daily choice." "I learned that from you, Grandma," Minji replied, moved. "You always said that true wealth lies in what we can give to others." The next day, a new foundation initiative was to be launched, a microcredit program for small social entrepreneurs. The idea came from the stories shared at the Old People's Shelter, where many had lost everything and rebuilt their lives through mutual help. "Let's call it the Cherry Blossom Project," Ki-hyun suggested, "because like those flowers, hope and kindness can also bloom in the most unlikely places." The city continued its frenetic pace outside, but within the foundation's walls, a silent revolution was taking place. Every story transformed, every life touched, and every dream realized was proof that love and purpose could change the world. And it all started with the simple act of kindness one morning, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the simplest gestures. The sun was rising over Seoul when Minji opened the doors of the new Choi Community Center. Built where the convenience store used to be, the space, modern and welcoming, retained elements of the old establishment, including the same coffee machine that had witnessed the beginning of her story with Ki-hyun. "It's strange to be here after all this time," she said, pouring coffee for the first visitors to the opening. The event brought together people from all walks of life, from homeless people to executives from big companies, all united by the common purpose of celebrating the power of social transformation. Mrs. Park arrived early, accompanied by a group of elderly people from the shelter. Her eyes lit up as she recognized details of the old store preserved in the center's decor. "See, sometimes we need to keep some things from the past in order to build a better future," she said, smiling at Minji. Ki-hyun watched everything from a discreet corner, wearing jeans and a t-shirt like he used to when he pretended to be just Ki. His father, Jin-ho, approached silently. "Your mother would be proud," he said, leaning on his cane. "Not just for the center, but for who you've become." The opening ceremony began with a surprise performance, a choir made up of beneficiaries of the foundation's various programs. Among them was a young woman Minji recognized immediately, the student he had given his scarf to that cold morning so long ago. "Today I'm a medical scholar," she revealed during her speech, "and I promise to continue the chain of kindness that changed my life." The impact of the Choi Foundation had spread far beyond Seoul. Representatives of social organizations from various Asian countries were present, interested in replicating the model that combines business efficiency with social purpose. "It's amazing how it all started with the simple gesture of kindness," commented Sua, who had become one of the foundation's top executives. "That morning at the convenience store changed not just 2 lives, but an entire way of thinking about business and social responsibility." Mrs. Kim, who had made a point of coming all the way from Busan for the opening, watched her granddaughter with watery eyes. "Remember when you were little and insisted on sharing your lunch with all the children in the neighborhood? Your heart was always bigger than your possibilities." The most moving moment of the day was when a group of young social entrepreneurs, supported by the Cherry Tree Project, presented their projects. Each initiative reflected the same essence that had brought Minji and Ki-hyun together, the belief that kindness and success could go hand in hand. "You're not just creating businesses," Ki-hyun said. "You're proving that it's possible to transform the world one gesture at a time." In the afternoon, as the guests circulated around the center, Minji found a quiet corner for reflection. On the wall, a framed photo showed the old convenience store on its first day of operation. "Thinking about how much we've changed?" asked Ki-hyun, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Thinking about how much we've stayed the same," she replied, accepting the coffee. "You still bring me coffee every day." The foundation's success had inspired other companies to rethink their practices. The Choi Group, once known only for its economic power, was now a benchmark for social innovation. Profits had not decreased, on the contrary. The new approach attracted investors who shared the same values. "Do you know what I'm most proud of?" commented Jean Ho during a quiet moment. "To see that your mother's legacy lives on through you too." The Choi Community Center quickly became a meeting place for people from all walks of life. In the mornings, executives had coffee alongside workers. In the afternoons, students received mentoring from experienced professionals. In the evenings, community groups met to discuss social projects. "It's as if the convenience store has grown along with our love," Minji reflected, observing the movement. As night fell over Seoul, the last guests said their goodbyes. Minji and Ki-hyun remained in the empty center, reliving memories and dreaming of the future. "Remember the first time I went into the store?" he asked, smiling. "I was so determined to prove that genuine kindness didn't exist. And you ended up proving the exact opposite," she added, entwining her fingers with his. The Choi Community Center was more than a physical space. It was a symbol of how love can transform not just two hearts, but an entire society. It was living proof that sometimes the greatest miracles begin in the most unlikely places, with the simplest gestures. Outside, the cherry trees continued their eternal dance, their petals carrying promises of new beginnings. And inside the center, two hearts beat in tune, knowing that their story was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. Because sometimes the true happy ending is not a destination, but a continuous journey of love, purpose, and transformation. And it all started with a simple act of kindness in a convenience store.